Hey everybody. Hello everybody, if I can talk today. I'm John Thomas Hill. This is the Rutherford Sports Network podcast. And this is the third in our series of changing the game, and this one will cover the National Football League. The other day we did college football. Of course, NFL is different because it's professional. And for those of you who are not obvious about that. But there are some things that definitely changed about the NFL. First off, the overtime rule. I don't like sudden death overtime in football. In hockey, I love it. In football, I'm not so enamored with it for one simple reason is that I think you could definitely up the drama a lot more. To me, this is how I would do it. In regular season, 2 10-minute quarters, and instead of having sudden death, the only way it ends earlier than the end of a particular period, excuse me, that caught me off guard, would be if a team goes up by more than a touchdown and a conversion, basically 9 points or more. Although that could change considering what I'm about to talk about in a little bit. But basically, if you go up by more than a score, you basically have to score twice to win the game or take the lead. Then the game should be over with. In the postseason, 15-minute periods, and I would say if you lead by the end of one period, the game's over. If in regular season, 2 10-minute periods. It was basically a 2-point shootout, which is basically 5 shots from the 2-yard line. You put it in or not. Or just have it be a tie. I like the shootout idea better because at least, even though I'm normally not for shootouts in hockey and soccer, this makes a lot of sense because if the game's still going by then I think it should be time to just go ahead and end it. In the playoffs, 2 periods, a 15-minute overtime, and then if it's still tied, then you take the college rule, which is put the football at the 25-yard line. You got 4 downs to get a first down, and you have you know how the college rule is, and you take your shots that way. If at the end of 4 of those periods, 2 at each end of the field, it's still tied, then I would do 4 at the 10, basically meaning that you have to, if you can't get it done in 4 downs, you don't score. If it's still tied at the end of those 10 overtime periods, which hopefully will never happen, then you get the shootout, which is basically 5 shots for the 2-yard line, and winner is the one that converts the most out of 5. And if it's still tied after 5, then you go sudden death then. These are just some ideas I've thrown out because I don't like the idea of just marching down the field, kicking a field goal, boom, you win the game, or just like it is now in the NFL where you score a touchdown, automatically you win the game. To me, I like the idea of having it to where you want to avoid overtime. You don't want to play it, so you're willing to take a risk in regulation to avoid being in overtime. And that, to me, makes a lot of sense. Here's the thing about the concerns about player safety about that. I think the key here is you're wanting to have games finish in regulation. You want to have that methodology where you have that desperation where you've got to take a chance to score to avoid going to overtime because you don't know how the game's going to end up. All right. The second rule I'd like to change would be the one that's going to cause a lot of controversy. I don't like 2 feet in bounds for a catch. I like 1 foot. I think it works in college, works in high school, works in the CFL, worked in the XFL. If I'm not mistaken, the USFL had the same rule. To me, it is a better rule than the 2-foot catch. I tend to like more offense in my football. I'm not an old traditionalist who goes, oh, you got to have 2 feet inbounds. No, just have it consistent all throughout levels of football. And have it to where you've got just the 1 foot inbound rule. It opens up the game more. And to me, that makes a lot more sense than worrying about a catch. You know, as far as I'm concerned, if you catch the football and you have it and you take a step and it's secured and you take a step, that's a catch. None of this continuing the catch. If you catch it and you take a step, that is a catch in my book. No more of this confusion and anything like that. Putting the 1 foot rule, in my opinion, makes a lot more sense and it opens up the game more, you know. The third rule I would change would be, very simply put, the timing rule at the end of the game and the end of the half. I believe if you make a first down, and like in college, you stop the clock. I think that should be the rule to basically make it to where you're not running out the clock at the end of the game. I would have also the intentional ground, basically saying to the ref, hey, signal the ref, you're going to intentionally ground the ball to stop the clock. It'll cost you a down. You know, have that rule in place because it would make the game more exciting and not just this little, oh, we ran out of time, we ran out of timeouts and all that, which is kind of lame in my opinion. You know, it's one of those things that, yeah, it's part of the game. You're supposed to conserve your timeouts, but at the same time, you know, it kind of is a cheap way to win, to be honest with you. And I like the idea of, you know, either having it to where you stop on the end when you get a first down, or giving you the option of spiking the football and stopping, having an intentional spike, which is like an intentional walk instead of throwing the 4 pitches, which is something I'll cover in baseball. Basically, signaling the referee you want to spike the football, stop the clock. It'll cost you a down, and you know there's the option there. Now, the XFL had some interesting rules. I referred earlier to, if you remember earlier, I talked about the XFL overtime rule, which it's not perfect. I don't think you go jump straight into that after the end of regulation, but I like it at the end. The idea of having it to where if you're done after 2 periods of overtime and you're still tied, you go straight to that. That's my opinion there. It would end ties for certainly. That would be for sure. But another rule I like is the conversion rule. They've been wanting to get rid of extra points for a while now, and why not simply adopt the XFL rule where you have a 1-point conversion from the 2, a 2-point conversion from the 5, and a 3-point conversion from the 10. And I'll even go one further, even though I doubt highly anybody's going to like this, a 4-point conversion from the 20. Now that would be high stakes, and it would change the rule obviously for the overtime, but my proposed overtime rule. But that's something I like the idea of, is to have a overtime rule that makes sense, to where it's not ending all of a sudden unless it says you're up and you have a chance to end the game. Then you take it. But to me, I just don't like it. You know, I really don't. You know, yeah, there's that drama. I mean, you could change the rules where, yeah, the first couple of overtime periods, you play it like that, and then if it's still tied, you still have. If the third overtime, then you have sudden death, or what have you. To me, it just makes a lot more sense to do it that way. Plus, it puts more emphasis on gambling on the field. Not gambling in real life, but gambling, taking a gamble, taking a chance, and putting more pressure on the coaches to make the decision. Yeah, it's going to Because coaches, by habit, tend to be conservative no matter what sport they're in because it's their job on the line. And I want to see coaches take a shot at that. Okay, another rule for the XFL I'd like to see adopted is the kickoff rule. I like the idea of what they had with the kickoffs. I would change it a bit. Instead of having them start 5 yards apart at the 30-yard line, bring it up to either the 35 or 40-yard line to give the returner an opportunity to have more of a chance of getting a bigger return. You're going to have some naysayers going, well, that would just kill field position and give more of an advantage for the offense. Well, guess what? I tend to like higher scoring games and giving an offense a better chance to, it's all about putting more emphasis on making it harder for defenses to just shut down teams and because let's face it, most casual fans, and I'll be the first to admit I'm more of a casual fan than anything else. Excuse me. You can tell I'm not a professional because I occasionally cough and burp sometimes. I try not to burp, but I like the rule when the XFL had it, and I think it makes a lot of sense for the NFL to adapt that rule. I mean, they adapted a lot of other things. They adapted the eye in the sky camera that is so popular with the NFL these days. That was an XFL invention almost 20 years ago. I think another rule change would help speed up the game some is to get rid of after an incompletion. Instead of putting the play clock at 40 seconds, put it at 30 seconds. I would say have a consistent, and instead of after a completion or a running play, instead of having a 25-second play clock, have 20 seconds. Yeah, it's just a few seconds, but those seconds add up. The replay rule. Here's how I would do it. I would have much shorter. I have a replay official in the stadium, like they had in the XFL, that's communicating with the referee on the field. I would put the replay on the jumbotron. The rule would be as no players from either team can be around the officials as they're looking at this replay and they're communicating with the booth. It's similar to what they do in rugby, where they're communicating with the booth, they're looking at the play, and they can make a decision there. I would give each team 4 challenges a half, but the challenges would have to be completed within, say, 60 to 90 seconds. And the first one's a freebie. Each challenge after that, unless you're successful, costs you a timeout. So if you are out of timeouts, but you still have your challenges, if you challenge and fail, that's a penalty, 15 yards, which would mean you better be right or it's going to cost you. So yeah, I like the idea of having the official in the booth at the stadium because they can actually see the action, not in New York or anything like that, where you have an official that's right there in the stadium like the XFL had. What else? I like the idea of expanding the schedule to put more bye weeks in. I think they're eventually going to want to succeed in getting the 18 weeks. I think it'll happen, and in my opinion, I think they should start the season earlier, like I mentioned with college football the other day. Start it in mid-August, have 3 bye weeks instead of 1, have 18-game regular season, and there you go. You'd have an extra. I would have it mandated that if you have a Thursday night game on the schedule, you have a bye on the Sunday before. You cannot play a short week, and that goes for Detroit and Dallas and whoever plays them on Thanksgiving. those teams should have a bye the week before. And it would be create a heck of a lot more havoc for fantasy football players, but it would make a lot of sense. Plus, it would make the Thursday night games much more attractive to the audience, and potentially you could even have, say, a Wednesday night game, which I doubt they will ever actually do that, but you never know with the NFL. I also think that the XFL has proven that there is a market for springtime football. It's not a huge market, but it is a market, especially considering Major League Baseball is wanting to shoot themselves in the foot quite often. I think that if I were the NFL, I would seriously consider buying the XFL, rebranding it as the United States Football League, and having teams have their own a developmental team in nearby markets or close enough to where they would make sense. Like Las Vegas could have one in Oakland, and you wouldn't call it the Oakland Raiders anymore, but you could go back to the USFL days and call them the Oakland Invaders and whatnot. So you could theoretically do that. I think that there is a definite need for a developmental league. Don't play as many games as the NFL. Have a shorter schedule. Maybe even break it up into 4 conferences and have like the 2 top teams in the conference go in the playoffs and have it. Do it like that. But there is a definite need for more development in the National Football League. And you could experiment with safety rules, new rule changes, and see how they work and apply them for the NFL season. You could develop players instead of having them come into mini camps and whatnot. You could have a whole system filtering down through that, so it would not be as easy to fire a coach. So yeah, to me it makes a lot of sense because football is the only sport that does not have a defined minor league. Basketball really doesn't, except for the G League, but it does have international basketball in Australia, Europe, China, what have you. So there is a minor league system in a loose minor league system in the NBA. NHL and Major League Baseball have their minor league systems that have been around for a long time. And I think that's very key for the NFL's future, is to have these rules tried out in a spring league and see how they work and tweak them and adjust them to where you can bring them into the NFL, and then the players are ready for it, and they've watched these games and they're ready for it. And they're going to have players that never make it to the NFL, but they'll have at least a play in the spring league. Who knows? They could work 2 or 3 years. They could work their way to where they can make it onto an NFL roster and such. So there is definitely that. I think that by expanding the schedule a bit, by having a spring league, by having more of an emphasis on player safety, here's another rule I think should be taken out. No more 5-yard bump rule. Unless they're going for the football, the defensive back or linebacker, what have you, cannot interfere with the receiver as they're going downfield. No chuck with 5-yard rule. They cannot touch them. It would open up the game, and I think it would also help the defensive backs, because instead of trying to chuck and miss and getting beat, it would give them a slight advantage because they would know they would not have to be able to just bump and run coverage. They'd get used to it. Defenses can adapt. I think the time may very well be coming soon where you have to take into consideration the possibility that maybe forward motion might possibly work. I don't know if we're ready for that yet in the NFL. There are some rules I've changed. The offensive lineman downfield, ineligible receiver downfield rule needs to be changed. I think unless there's a clear intent that the offensive lineman was downfield and it was clearly a play pass. Whereas, it wasn't a screen pass or anything like that. It was let's say it was a situation where it was you're faking the run and it's a play action pass. Unless that guy's way downfield, 15 yards, 10, 15 yards, I would say, change the rule to make it to where offensive linemen can get downfield further and not get called for that penalty. When it would say there was a situation where the running back is a clear running play and the running back's bottled up and he sees an open wide receiver, he throws it downfield, and the offensive lineman's just like 5 yards down the field because he's trying to block for the running back, and you're going to call it for that penalty. So to me, that makes a lot of sense to me. All right, well, I'm sure you can think of more rule changes you'd like. I'm sure some of you will not agree with what I've come up with, but I wanted to throw this out there. I'm hoping by this week to finish up the series. I've got to start the new job. I've got a few things I've got to do this week, but I'm going to hopefully be able to do Major League Baseball, the NFL, Major League Baseball, the NBA, the NHL, NASCAR maybe, and a few other sports. I may start just doing one a day, just shooting from the hip, giving you some ideas of what I'd change. If you don't agree with it, that's perfectly fine. Comment wherever you hear this. Let me know. We're going to set up a page. We actually have a page. Well, that's the other podcast I do, the non-sports podcast I do. And we're going to be resetting up the Facebook page here in the next little bit. And or you can just go to John Thomas Hill Show at Facebook. You can find it there. That's my non-podcast, my non-sports podcast. My non-podcast podcast. That makes a lot of sense. Okay. Well, that's it for now, everybody. And we'll talk more at you later, or something like that, something more grammatically correct. In the meantime, hope you have a great Sunday. And for everybody here, good night, good luck, and may the good news be yours.